Very, very welcome. Before we begin, a very quick note on privilege. I remind members and witnesses of the long-standing parliamentary practice that you should not criticise or make charges against any person or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable or engage in a speech that might be regarded as damaging to the good name of the person or entity. Therefore, if your statements are potentially defamatory in relation to an identifiable person or entity, you'll be directed to discontinue your remarks, and it's imperative that you comply with any such direction. I would also like to remind members of the constitutional requirements that in order to participate in public meetings, members must be physically present within the confines of the Leinster House complex. Members of the committee attending remotely must do so from in the precincts of Leinster House. This is due to the constitutional requirement that in order to participate in public meetings, members must be physically present within the confines of the place where Parliament has chosen to sit. In this regard, I would ask any members partaking via Microsoft Teams that prior to making their contribution to the meeting that you confirm that you're on the grounds at the Leinster House campus. Okay, all opening statements have been circulated to members and will be published on the Oireachtas website after the session. As agreed, all members will have 5 minutes to deliver their opening statements, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers with members on the range of issues that will be discussed. If you have any more detailed information, you can send it to the clerk and we will circulate it to members afterwards. And just to mention that we will have members who are in and out consistently because there will be requirements in each of the chambers, so read nothing more into that. So our first opening statement is from Ms. Julie McKenna to deliver your opening statement on behalf of Novice. You're very welcome, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to address you today on the issue of drug use in Ireland and in particular the experience and needs of women in addiction. We wish to share our frontline experience of working with this group for more than 2 decades, sharing the lived and living experience of our clients. By way of introduction, Novus is a homeless charity, and among our clients we support women who are experiencing both homelessness and substance use. Our experience is grounded in frontline service delivery. We operate dedicated women's accommodation here in Dublin, funded by the DRHE and HSE Social Inclusion, a specialist drop-in and outreach service for women in Limerick, particularly those who are rough sleeping and using crack cocaine, which is funded by the Midwest Regional Drug and Alcohol Forum, and a national suite of health and recovery workers providing tailored interventions for the women we serve. Novus recognises the complex and enduring trauma experienced by women accessing our services, so all services development and delivery is through the lens of trauma-informed practice and is client-centred and reduces harm. Our experience tells us clearly that addiction does not impact women in the same way as men. Women's pathways into addiction, their experiences within it and their routes to recovery are shaped by gender. Many of the women we support have experienced gender-based violence, coercive relationships, sexual exploitations and deep trauma. A significant number are separated from their children, a source of profound grief and shame that can both drive and perpetuate substance use. Many live with dual diagnosis, addiction and mental health difficulties, often compounded by neurodivergence, generational poverty and social isolation. Our experience also tells us that the rate of female homelessness and addiction is rising, both proportionally and in real numbers. For example, recent figures from the Rough Sleepers team attached to Limerick Homeless Action Team noted that more women than men were sleeping rough in the city at times in 2025. This is unprecedented. In Dublin, there are growing demands for female beds in the homeless system. Homelessness itself is rarely a single-use experience. It's complex and multi-directional and often can be identified upstream. Women move between sofa surfing, rough sleeping and emergency accommodation and unsafe relationships. European research shows that women are often more reluctant to engage in homeless services because of male-dominated nature of these environments and often remain hidden homeless and on the fringes of support and in precarious living arrangements. This was found to be particularly the case in Ireland. Crack cocaine use has had a profound impact on the rate and experience of female homelessness and their ability to engage in services. The speed and intensity of addiction, the associated risks of exploitation and rapid deterioration in physical and mental health require a tailored, gender-informed response. Women engage in increasingly risky survival behaviour, including survival sex, rough sleeping and violent personal relationships. The impact of crack cocaine on their physical and mental well-being comprises their ability to engage with and sustain placements in homeless services. This is particularly true when women have to share bedrooms within these services. Through our dedicated drop-in outreach service, we provide low-threshold engagement for women who are often excluded from mainstream services. Our health and wellbeing workers deliver targeted supports addressing mental health and physical health, addiction, empowerment and social integration. We work to stabilise women, reduce harm and create pathways into treatment and recovery. For many, this is the first safe space they have experienced in years. We are delighted to open our first female-only recovery house in Limerick this April, which will provide an opportunity for women to sustain meaningful recovery and build a recovery capital after treatment, rather than returning to homelessness when treatment ends. Services like this are essential to create sustainable pathways from addiction and homelessness and prevent the cycle of repeat homelessness amongst women. We need more accessible, timely treatment options for women, including trauma-informed, gender-specific programmes. We need significantly more recovery houses, particularly for women otherwise facing a return to homelessness. Crucially, we need long-term accommodation solutions for women leaving homelessness and treatment service, including housing that will enable them to establish relationships with their children and with their families. Many of the women we work with struggle to maintain accommodation in the community as they find it difficult to manage their own front door. With appropriate step-down and long-term supported accommodation, we see women cycle back into homelessness and addiction. Recovery does not happen on a 6 to 12 week timeline. It requires stability, safety and sustained support. If we are serious about addressing drug use in Ireland, we must be serious about addressing women's experiences within it. A gender-neutral approach will not deliver gender equal outcomes. Investment in dedicated women's services is not an add-on, it's essential. We urge the committee to prioritise expansion of dedicated female homeless services with single-room occupancy that creates safety and is delivered through the lens of trauma-informed practice. Expansion of gender-specific treatment and recovery services. Extension of post-treatment support and housing for women to end repeat homelessness. The provision of LTA service for women. Trauma-informed integrated dual diagnosis care. Sustained funding for specialist women outreach and drop-in services. The women we support are not hard to reach. They are underserved. With the right gender-informed supports, recovery is possible. We see it every day.
Okay, thank you so much. Next up is Ms. Susan Diffney, giving your opening statement on behalf of Jane's Place. You're very welcome.
Thank you. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to speak today. My name is Susan Diffney and I'm the Service Coordinator of Jane's Place, Merchants Quay Ireland's first gender-specific, low-threshold and trauma-informed service. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about women, drug use and addiction. Merchants Quay Ireland believes in a just and inclusive society where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Women who experience homelessness and addiction face distinct intersecting barriers that differ substantially from those experienced by men. These include gender-based violence and coercive control, trauma linked to physical and sexual abuse, vulnerability to cocooning, drug-related intimidation and sex work, fear of judgment, stigma and child removal, unsafe or male-dominated services, lack of privacy, safety or emotional security, caregiving responsibilities that limit service access and a deep mistrust of services due to past negative experiences. Evidence shows that women delay seeking support until crisis point because mainstream services feel unsafe, inaccessible or not designed with their realities in mind. Women in addiction are often trapped in dangerous situations, with drug use often a barrier to accessing domestic violence refuges, mental health and counselling services. Women often have to make the extremely difficult and brave decision to leave a dangerous situation to sleep on the streets. Many women choose to sleep rough in remote, isolated locations because they feel safer. For other women, childcare and carer roles within the family often create further barriers to accessing addiction supports. Additionally, mainstream services are not set up to cater for the specific needs of trans women. Jane's Place was created to address some of these gaps. We provide a female-only, trauma-informed space that provides support without preconditions, welcoming women whether they are in active use, stabilising or in recovery. We offer a calm relational environment where safety comes before change, acknowledging that safety does not solely lie in one's physical environment, but psychological safety is felt in one's nervous system. Jane's Place offers an evidence-based, trauma-informed model that reflects the realities of the most marginalised. It provides non-judgmental relational support to women experiencing homelessness, substance use, trauma, gender-based violence and social exclusion. The service offers a calm, welcoming environment where women can rest, connect with others, access practical and holistic supports and engage on their own terms without pressure to follow a linear recovery pathway. Jane's Place is explicitly open to all women with experiences of homelessness and substance use, regardless of where they are in their journey. Engagement is voluntary and there are no requirements to demonstrate readiness, abstinence or stability. Jane's Place, therefore, does not fit neatly into conventional service categories. It is neither a purely crisis-oriented drop-in centre nor a structured programme requiring sustained participation. Instead, it occupies an intentional space between these models, a place where safety, stability and self-worth are cultivated to support engagement rather than prerequisites for entry. Jane's Place aims to be a model of best practice, demonstrating what is possible when relational care, safety and dignity are prioritised. Women are welcomed exactly as they are, with the understanding that healing is non-linear. As a gender transformative women's service, we work to break down the barriers, advocate for change and model inclusive, compassionate services designed with and for women. When services are designed with safety and dignity at their core, engagement improves. We have seen a significant increase in demand for the services offered, from 40 women in 2023 to 255 last year in 2025. This included over 4,000 individual interventions. This change can be attributed to a move into our new trauma-informed design building, where we could offer confidential medical services, key working case management, counselling groups, holistic therapies, and drop-in food and shower services. In this new building, we consistently see women reconnecting with healthcare after long periods of avoidance, improved emotional regulation, reduced risk behaviours, and increased disclosure of gender-based violence. We have seen an uptake in cervical smear tests, breast checks, and access to contraception as a result. We also see non-outcome focused benefits, such as an increase in self-esteem, self-worth, and confidence. Women reconnect with themselves and their individual passions. This creates the foundation for change and builds recovery capital. We welcome the principles of the new National Drug Strategy, recognising the needs of women and for mainstreaming of gender-sensitive responses and interventions. We particularly welcome Action 2.1 of the draft strategy, outlining the provision of funds for high-quality, gender-specific services, and Action 2.8, which provides for tailored support for those experiencing dual diagnosis, homelessness and domestic or sexual violence. Finally, today, committee, we ask for investment in gendered services, gender-specific harm reduction services, gender-specific drug-free accommodation for women leaving prison or treatment services, and increased hospital stabilisation and detox beds for women experiencing polydrug use. Thank you.
Susan, thank you so much. I would now like to invite Mr. Gary Broderick to deliver your opening statement on behalf of SAIL.
Thank you very much. Chair, colleagues and friends, when we talk about drug use and addiction, too often we're talking about men and then awkwardly adding women in afterwards. For those of us who work with women every day, that simply does not reflect reality. Women's pathways into drug use, their experiences of addiction, their routes to safety and recovery are different, and our systems must finally catch up to that truth. Women rarely arrive at addiction in isolation. They arrive after poverty, violence, homelessness, racism, mothering under surveillance, loss of children, and the daily work of surviving a world that often harms them and then blames them for how they cope. When a woman who uses drugs meets a service, whether that's a homeless hostel, a Garda station, a court, a refuge, a clinic, she brings all of those intersecting histories and identities with her. Too often, the system greets her as a case or a risk, greets her as they would a man, ignoring that she's a person whose life makes sense in the context within which she's living. At SAIL, we've learned from women that addiction is not just about substances. It is about relationships, safety, power, shame, and hope. It is about the violence they have survived, the housing they never had, the partners they are afraid to leave, the children they fear losing, the children they grieve after they are taken into care, however valid the separation may be, the racism and classism they meet at every door. An intersectional lens is not an academic luxury. It is the minimum we owe women if we are serious about justice. That means gender-sensitive services are not enough on their own. Women-only responses that do not tackle stigma, violence and poverty will not do. From the first point of contact with a Garda on the street, a key worker in homeless services, a social worker, a domestic violence advocate, women deserve responses that understand how gender, trauma, poverty, migration status, ethnicity, disability and criminalisation shape both their drug use and their possibilities for the future. Stigma sits at the heart of this. The stigma directed at women who use drugs is not accidental. It is a socially maintained punishment for failing to conform to idealised roles of good woman and good mother. It is applied most harshly to women who are already marginalised, women who are poor, traveller and Roma women, migrant women, women in sex work, women with criminal records, women whose mental health has been ignored or undiagnosed. Stigma is not just words. It is a barrier to housing, to health, to care, to safety, to motherhood, to employment, to full citizenship. We have seen in the mental health field that it is possible to mount a collective public assault on stigma. Campaigns, advocacy, and the voices of people with lived experience have begun to shift how we speak about depression, anxiety, suicide. It is imperfect, but it shows what can be done when we decide that shame is no longer an acceptable policy tool. It is time, long past time, to bring drug use and addiction into that same frame. Our policies and strategies often say the right things. They acknowledge women. They mention gender-sensitive responses. They nod to trauma. But acknowledgement is no longer enough. We need resourcing, accountability, and redesign. We need domestic violence services that offer shelter to women who use drugs, not just outreach services. We need Gardaí in courts that see health, safety, and housing as part of the response to offending, not a distraction from it. And we need drug treatment and recovery services that are built with women, not just offered to them, and not built and then their use changed when other needs are seen as more important. Finally, we must also reimagine recovery and recovery capital for women. For some, it will involve abstinence. For others, it will mean reduced use, safer use, stability, an end to violence, reunification with children, or simply the right to live with dignity and choice. Recovery for women cannot be measured only in urine tests or days abstinent. It must be measured in safety from partners and pimps, in secure housing, in reduced contact with the criminal justice system, in connection, in voice, in the rebuilding of identity and possibility. Addiction is a different experience for women. Our services, our strategies, and our politics must reflect the intersecting realities of women who use drugs. And together, we must finally extend our assault on stigma to include them.
All right, thank you so much. Next, I'd like to welcome Ms. Anita Harris back for giving your opening statement on behalf of the Kilmoyne Ashley House.
Chair, committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Anita Harris, Deputy Head of Services of Kilmoyne Therapeutic Community, and I'm joined by my colleague Aoife Marshall, Team Leader of our Gender Specific Services in the Limerick region. Kilmoyne was established in 1973 in response to Ireland's growing drug crisis. Over the past 50 years, our services have continued to evolve to meet the emerging needs, yet our vision has remained the same as it was in 1973. We believe that everyone should have the opportunity to overcome addiction and lead a fulfilled, productive life. Central to this vision is ensuring equitable access to recovery for women, children and families. Since the 1980s, we have provided gender-specific support with the opening of Ashley House, a residential facility exclusive for women. Today, we are proud to also operate a second dedicated facility in the Midwest region. In 2025, Kilmoyne supported 3,282 individuals nationally. 42% of these were women, a record number that represents years of work to reduce barriers for women such as childcare, stigma and violence to enter treatment as working. 72 babies and young children were supported across residential and regional programmes. These aren't just numbers, they're young lives given a chance to heal, grow and thrive. A strong body of national and international research demonstrates that women experience addiction and recovery in fundamentally different ways, shaped by distinct biological, psychological and social factors. Dr. Sarah Morton's recent Irish research shows that women's substance use is deeply connected to overlapping challenges such as poverty, trauma, motherhood pressures, social exclusion, domestic and gender-based violence, homelessness, transactional sex and contact with the criminal justice system. Her work demonstrates that substance use for many women is both a coping mechanism for and a consequence of mental health difficulties and instability in housing and finances. These findings underline the need for gender-responsive specialist services that prioritise women's safety, stabilisation and long-term recovery. Across Ireland, there are excellent examples of gender-responsive practices, and many of those services are represented here today. However, provision remains inconsistent. Gender-specific supports are ad hoc, limited in capacity, underfunded and unevenly distributed geographically. As a result, access to appropriate treatment for women varies depending on where they live. Coalmine continues to operate the state's only long-term residential programmes exclusively for women and their children. Our therapeutic communities in Dublin and Limerick provide fully integrated evidence-based treatment and recovery tailored to the woman's needs. A key component of these programmes is our mother and child placement, which supports women and their children together for a minimum of 12 months. Childcare provision is not an enhancement nor a luxury, it's a necessity. Women remain the primary caregivers within households in Ireland, and this includes women with substance use issues. The fear of having children removed by Child Protection Service remains one of the most significant barriers preventing women from seeking treatment. Gender-responsive services must therefore be designated to support rather than separate women and their children wherever safe and appropriate. Coalmine offer a fully structured treatment and trauma-informed programme for women entering whom not only seek recovery from substance use but are also recovering from multiple other challenges such as mental health, homelessness and trauma. Women receive daily group therapy, one-to-one counselling and individual case management. Their children who have their own support needs are supported through our dedicated on-site early years and preschool service. Both mother and children are supported through the internationally recognised Parents Under Pressure framework. The service operates within a fully integrated multidisciplinary team consisting of both clinical, medical and clinical therapeutic staff to ensure the emotional, physical and mental health support needs are being met. In addition, there are wraparound supports including on-site physician, GP and psychiatrist, public health nurse, housing and education supports. These services consistently operate at full capacity. Demand continues to far exceed availability. In 2025, we supported 83 women and 52 children in our residential programmes, and over 90% of these participating women remained engaged for the full duration of the programme. This clearly demonstrates that the services are effectively meeting the needs of the women and children who access them. There is continuing waiting lists for women, including pregnant women and mothers with young children, awaiting residential placements. This is more than a statistic, it's a call to action. Recommendations, policy and coordination, development of guiding principles grounded in an intersectional framework that recognises gender-based differences in care provision. 2. Service provision. Develop gender-responsive community services, including childcare, to support women in every county in Ireland in their own community. Develop specialised Tier 4 residential services offering integrated support for vulnerable women and their children in each healthcare region. Investment in current services. Provision of sustained and adequate funding for services throughout the full recovery to continuum of care. Integrated care, both clinical and therapeutic, requires staff that are trained and supervised to the highest standards. Investment in staff is a must if we are serious about providing right care at the right time. Conclusion. On behalf of Coalmine and the women we serve, I urge you to prioritise the development and implementation of gender-responsive services within national addiction policy and practice. Women should not be required to rely on minimal interventions or limited service availability. Addressing the complex needs of women in addiction extends far beyond gender-specific provision. It requires comprehensive, evidence-based and gender-responsive interventions supported by sustained investment. This must be underpinned by policy frameworks that embed clear principles of quality, equity, safety and dignity in the delivery of care.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Ms Nikki Hayes, you're up next. You're very welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Committee and Chair for having me here today. As this is my lived experience, I prefer to speak it rather than read it. And I represent nearly every organisation that's been talking so far when it comes to a case study. I start from the very start. I grew up in Bray in County Wicklow in a normal house. I'm one of 5 children. My father was an alcoholic, so initially I was born into an alcoholic home. Now, he got sober, he went to the Rutland Centre when I was 4, but I've learned of recent that he kept the alcoholic behaviours, so I grew up in an alcoholic house. He was, I guess, what we call a dry drunk, so everything was chaos when I was growing up. Everything was kind of always all over the place. And I also had undiagnosed mental health issues. I suffered with anxiety and depression. I had numerous self-harm issues and, attempts on my own life throughout my whole life, which was only recognised when I was 15. And then it took until I was 34 to actually get diagnosed with a personality disorder. So this was all going on alongside what was an addiction building in the background as well. I was 11 when I had my first drink. And the reason that I had the drink was I wanted to fit in. And I felt that if I had that drink, that people might like me a bit more and, you know, maybe I'd be accepted, because I always felt like I sat outside and I was the black sheep and I was nobody's best friend. So it worked for me. It became like a coping mechanism. And I knew that if I had a drink that, you know, people think she's more fun and, you know, they wanted me around them. So this was, you know, my teenage years, developmental years, where, you know, you're going to really need to have a clear head, and I didn't. I had undiagnosed mental health issues and I had a growing addiction. For me, the addiction was always going on in the background. So if there was a major event, like when my father passed away, when my niece passed away, drink would become the option for me and I would run straight through it. After my father died, I disappeared for 5 weeks, and I know many of you would know this with an addict. They become uncontactable. My family didn't know where I was gone for 5 weeks, phone off. But for me, that was just another thing to do. It was, you know, it was part of what I did to cope and how I got on with life. This was just something that always pained me, that I could never express how I was feeling. Instead, I wanted to just numb it because it was overwhelming. When I had my daughter, at the age of 34, I had postnatal depression. And as a result of that, my drinking became an awful lot more heavier as well. I was hospitalised for 8 weeks, and there they diagnosed borderline personality disorder, which they think I had all along, but it just was never diagnosed. And at the time, my consultant said, you know, we think that there's a bigger problem here. We think there's an addiction issue that's not being identified. And they recommended that I go to Coolmine. And at the time, I was afraid to go because I said, I'm going to lose my child. She was only a year old. And I did their day programme for a while, but I didn't commit to it, and I continued drinking and fell back into addiction again. That cost me my marriage. And I had my daughter for a couple of years on my own, but as a result of my drinking, she had to go and live with her dad. I was on my own, and then COVID hit. And because of COVID, I didn't have to be accountable. I didn't have to go to work. I sat at home and I drank and I drank and I drank. I had no one to show up to at work. I had no child to look after. She was gone to her dad. So basically, most people might have said, I'll go get better. For me, I said, I've nothing else to lose. But I was so wrong, because after a couple of months, I lost my home, I lost my job. My family hadn't talked to me in years, so I had nobody around me. I had no friends, I had nothing. And then my landlady sold my house, and I ended up on the streets of Dublin. And I lived there for 3.5 months. And can I tell you, when you're a woman on the streets of Dublin, it's not a nice place to be. And especially when you've got no contact with anybody and nobody really even knows that you're there. It's a very scary place. And thanks to some services that were there, you know, outreach teams, I did have some support, but it was quite limited. And again, I had no contact with my child. I went into treatment in November 23 to Tiglin, and thank God I did, because I got my family back, I got my friends back, I got my daughter back. Not full time, but we're rebuilding, and I'm getting my life back bit by bit. But what I've learned since the story came out about me in the media last year was all the girls that are just like me around the country, who've lost their children, who've lost their jobs, who've lost their family, who've lost everything, and nobody is there to help them because we don't have correct services, we don't have enough services. I am 2 years and 3 months sober, and I still don't have my child full time. So, you know, there's an awful lot of gaps in the system. The dual diagnosis is a massive thing. Had I been diagnosed a lot sooner, maybe I wouldn't have gone through what I went through, but it happened, and there's thousands and thousands of women out there who need support, and we just don't give it to them. And I was one of them, and I have support now, but it took a long time to come around. All I would say is if people could recommend, if I could recommend something, it would be for more services for women, definitely dual diagnosis to be recognised more, and more places like Ashley House, because we need it. We don't have it, and I'm lucky to be alive. It's pure luck that I'm here today and that I'm able to tell this story, so thank you.
Well, Nikki, thank you so much. We're very grateful that you're here today and very thankful that you're telling your story. It's going to help a lot of people. First up from our Oireachtas members is Senator Frances Black. You have 5 minutes.
Mahagod, thanks very much, and thank you so much to all our speakers, our witnesses today, and thank you for the amazing work that you're doing on the ground, and thank you, Nikki, for sharing your story. Really, really do appreciate it. I'm standing in for Senator Lynn Ruane today. She would have loved to have been here. I just need to say that. She really wanted to be here, but she couldn't due to other commitments. And unfortunately, I'll have to leave, but I will come back. I have another committee at 1:30, so I will have to leave, but I will come back to you. So I suppose I just have a couple of questions. I think there's no doubt about it that we can take from all the testimonies is that addiction, you know, never it's never a one-size-fits-all experience. And so the reality is that recovery can't be either. You know, as someone who works in the sector, I work with an organisation called the Rise Foundation who supports family members. I believe that the flexibility of support we offer, and that you offer, is ultimately what determines how far it can reach and what it can help. So I suppose with that in mind, I just wanted to ask, and I'd like to understand, I suppose, how witnesses feel about the draft national drug strategy, and like, does it position us to deliver what kind of flexible, needs-based support? And we all recognise, no doubt about it, the need for sustained investment in women-specific addiction services and in integrated dual diagnosis, which is what you've all spoke about today. Very, very important. So do the actions set out in the draft strategy clearly indicate where those investments should be targeted? That's something I think that's important. And do they give you the confidence that the system will be able to meet women where they are? You know what I mean? And I know, Gary, you mentioned the reimagining recovery. Perhaps you could say a little bit more, speak to how recovery is imagined under the National Drugs Strategy. So I've loads of questions, but I'll start with that one, and then I'll go off and I'll come back and I'll ask other questions when I come back. So we've only 2.5 minutes left.
Oh, actually, Senator, I was wrong. You have 7 minutes, not
7
5.
minutes,
I was
okay.
taking 2 off.
Okay,
You
well,
have them back.
I'll start with that question anyway.
Directed at anyone in particular?
Well, maybe Gary, if you're okay with regards to the Reimagine and Recovery, and you know what that might look like under the National Drug Strategy. And again, it's just to come back to the National Drug Strategy and what your thoughts are on it, and does it fit into what you all think should be there? Do you know what I mean?
Thanks, Francis, and for all the work you do as well. That's a big question ultimately, but I think sometimes it's about when we look at policy, we can write down the right words, but then what's the meaning behind those words, and are we willing to back that up? And I think too often recovery can be measured in terms of the relationship with the substance of choice. We've already been talking about the impact of domestic violence, the impact of mental health and undiagnosed mental health issues. Sometimes people are using drugs in order to manage their mental health issues. Sometimes there's a whole myriad of problems that are there, and when you work with women you realise that very often the drug is 5th, 6th, 8th, 10th on the list of main issues. So therefore, when we think about recovery, if all we do is kind of focus on the substance itself, then it can look like women are not in recovery or they're not working hard enough. And that's really where we have to start embracing different understandings, which are reflected in words in some of the policies, but maybe not always in the way we think about recovery and how we welcome and accept women who are working really hard, but maybe not being able to show clear urines or the traditional ways of measuring recovery. And with that as well, lots of people writing. David Best has been over. I know Trinity have been doing work on recovery capital. The Recovery College is talking about it, but really exploring what recovery capital might look like. Because when you have women who need more than themselves looked after in their recovery journey, because as has been said beautifully, there's more than women are left holding the baby, literally. And so when we think about what is needed for her to make that journey in recovery and to be building that recovery capital, it is different for men. And so we have to, in a sense, take off the male blinkers and imagine what would recovery capital look like, where is not only a roof over my head, but a safe roof over my head. Not just that a violent partner isn't there, but also that the community itself is supportive and encouraging and backing people up. That after years of living in homeless accommodation, which is often the case for lots of the women we work with in Sale, that that maybe they don't have the basic household skills. So the kind of supports that we now need to give to women, that is building recovery capital. It doesn't fit easily into that addiction response. So it's really about reimagining. And I think for me, with the draft National Drug Strategy, it's great that women are named, but women were named in the last one. And I wasn't particularly impressed with the understanding of women's needs in the development of supports. I think there's lots of statements in the current drug strategy without any specifics. And I really would call for this joint committee to help the strategy to think about the specifics that are needed and dedications. And I think my colleagues here have named a lot of those, and Nikki spoke about them brilliantly there in her own life experience, the kind of supports that are needed. And we need to nail them down. And I mean, maybe we need a national drug strategy for women, and that would help rather than just tagging women into the story. It is not the same, and that's the work that we need to do. And as I mentioned in my own opening statement, stigma is one of the biggest damaging experiences for women. It is not okay for people to use drugs in Ireland, according to this unwritten stigma. We can drink alcohol. It's interesting, even in the title of the draft National Drug Strategy, it's drugs and harmful alcohol use. And it's like, oh, okay, we're making a distinction there. That's strange. So, when it comes to stigma, it impacts anybody who uses drugs, but it really impacts on women who use drugs, and it impacts even worse on mothers who use drugs. And we know that because of that stigma, research tells us that the children of mothers who use drugs lose out as well, because women are terrified of going back to services where judgment has been there. So I think it is really long past time that we took a real good look at what we're doing about stigma in relation to drug use. It's a mental health issue. It is not a choice. It is not an illegal activity. It unfortunately is those things as well, but it is predominantly something that needs support. And when we can sit here and listen to Nikki's story, spoken so clearly and eloquently, and then ignore all of the other women and package them in under a stigma response. That for me is where we have to start reimagining how things could be. And it's not like with mental health, we haven't started that journey. So why we can't piggyback those kind of experiences and do the same for addiction.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. Would anybody like to build on anything that Gary has said, or we can just move on to the next? If anyone, yeah, Susan.
I would mind echoing what Gary said, but also adding in around, I suppose, that piece of being more specific around what funding, to where, to who, to new services, to existing services, but also to increase funding for the training and upskilling of professionals who are already working in services. So with that intersectional piece, we have siloed services. So we have domestic violence services, we have homeless services, we have addiction services, we have low threshold services and recovery services. And we're all working with the same clients. So if we upskilled the training of the existing professionals, we may be able to serve women better who do present to existing services. And also a cross-department approach, which I think the strategy briefly mentions. But if we were able to address the lists and the waiting lists for assessments for mental health, how many women and men and children are currently using substances to cope with their mental health who are waiting for mental health assessments and treatment in the country. So the cross-department approach, I think, is really important as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Senator. Next contributor is Deputy Marie Sherlock.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. And I want to say a huge thanks to all the organisations here today, and to Nikki for telling your story. I suppose I'm most familiar with SAIL, and I suppose it's to thank you, Gary, because I've learned so much from listening to yourselves over the years about how, in particular, women having their children with them is a critical part of the recovery journey, as opposed to this almost transactional attitude towards recovery, that it's like in for a period, out, and all of a sudden click your fingers and problems are solved. And I'm quite struck by the comment you made about, maybe we should have a national drug strategy for women, because I think in some ways that if we were to have that it would be making real what we're all calling for here, which is a transformation of approach to how we look at that addiction is really only the symptom of all those underlying challenges, whether it is mental health or homelessness or trauma or whatever else it might be. So I just want to pay a heartfelt tribute to all the work that has been done by yourself across Coolmine and Novus and Merchants Quay, and I know Jane's Place as well does enormous work. I suppose one of the things I just wanted to ask, though, was about, I think, one of the roles for this committee. So we have a national drug strategy now, a draft one, and it's draft with a capital D. And I think, one of the big challenges for our committee is making sure that there are clear tangibles put into the strategy. So time and again, we're hearing about the patchy an almost haphazard way that services have developed across the country. Not haphazard, but that they have grown up responding to a specific need. So I'd just like to hear, I suppose, from Coolmine and from Novus, just with regards to the residential demand, because clearly it's oversubscribed many times over. So to get a sense of what that demand is, because I think one of the jobs for our committee is actually mapping out where are the services across the country. Like, I struggle when people contact us, there's great services in some areas and then non-existent elsewhere. So maybe just talk to me a little bit about the demand to your service and the pathways, because again, I think that's a recurring theme about the pathways, that it's very obvious for some GPs or whoever is the first point of contact, and it's not at all obvious then for others. So maybe just talk a little bit more about your experiences or your views in that regard.
Well, I'll just answer for so just to say, Coolmine has 18 services, and actually only 3 of them are residentials, and a lot of people just, when they think of Coolmine, they think of the residential services. The demand for the residential service, particularly our mother and child, due to demand a number of years ago, there was a commitment to open another one in Limerick, because when we were looking at the demand, half of demand was coming from the Limerick area. These were people that had to move from their community, leaving all their children, have to come to Dublin, and like many services are located in Dublin, and for people to have to move and come to Dublin to access a service is not right, because what we do know, and in line with Sláinte Care, should be in their community. Services should be in their community. So I suppose just to say, first port of call is we would say people should actually be able to access in their own community and not actually have to go to a residential. Where the residential and the demand for the residential is everything we were speaking about here today. It's people presented a residential, substance use is the least of their problems. Yeah. The least of, and I will actually say, we don't even mention substance in Coolmine. It doesn't even actually come into any of the therapies, any of the group therapy. What we are dealing with when we come, and Novus talked about it and Sale talked about it here, very unfortunate women, when they come to access a service, they have lost everything. It's at the other end. There's no prevention piece. So Marie, when we talk about, yes, the prevention pieces can be done, people are coming into contact with their GPs. It's usually a lot of medical, they may have hospitals and the interventions aren't put in place there. It's usually right at the end when they've lost their children, they've lost their home, their mental health is really suffering. They're very unsafe. Many people, when they turn to our outreach doors, they're battered and bruised. They've received a very significant assault, which is where we really call for open door policies on all outreach and community services. Scheduled appointments, in my opinion, does not work for women. Scheduled one-to-one, come back next Tuesday and we'll see you. It's absolute, we have got rid of an absolute opportunity there to provide a service turned up at your service user. What's really sad is when we don't have the beds. When the need has been established, this woman is in a very unsafe place. She's on borderline of losing her children, on borderline of if this person had fast access to a treatment or residential bed, we could. So today we are consistently full. There's full, and what's terrible is we have to, who's most at risk? not at risk, it's who's worse than the other person. And when we have to use that, assessments now come to, the assessment is not based on need. The assessment is based on who has the worst need.
Yeah.
We are missing vital prevention pieces there. So there's a lot of work done. You know, children are always not considered when we talk about women, and we need to look at the mothering role of many of the women. When women present as pregnant, there's vital opportunity there if they'd access to a bed really, really quickly, you know, that has little harm and reduction of harm. If that person, when we have to tell that person they need to wait, you need to wait. Now there's more damage, more, you know, so residentials, absolutely. There needs to be residential facilities for women in every healthcare region in the country, you know. Still, there's only 2 mother and child in the whole country of Ireland. That's 40 placements. That's only 40 bed placements. Not near enough. And we do need to start changing our thinking in around residential. It's only for the worst case scenarios, because that's what people do when they think of residential beds. It's for those that have been most in crisis. If we start changing our thinking and our policy as a prevention piece, as opposed to when they are worse, I think we will achieve a lot in. So I'm delighted to see in the draft of the national, the call for more residential. And like Susan said there, I'm delighted to see that women are being specifically, and I was happy to see gender responsive as opposed to gender specific. My concern is when we talk about gender specific, people just add on a women's group or a women's room, and then say we are now providing a gender specific service. You know, it's so tokenistic. There is nothing responsive about it. So that's just a concern. So I'm delighted when I seen the word gender responsive as opposed to gender specific.
Okay.
Thank you, Anita. Does anyone else want to?
Yeah,
Nikki,
just over the last year, people have been contacted by mostly women. Their problem is that there is no connection of services. Everything is here, here, here. There's no information out there about community services. And if something that people have been calling out for, if there could be an app or some general thing which would connect the community with the likes of Coolmine, Tiglin, all the different services, but the community base, they don't seem to connect together. It's like everything is in a different place, but there's no joining of the dots. And that's something that's brought to me time and time again from people who are sitting at home afraid of losing their children, because they can't have their recovery and their children. If they want their recovery, they have to lose their children.
Thank you, Nikki. Jennifer, you and the manager want to speak?
In relation to your question about the residential services, I suppose in Dublin we operate and provide services for 65 plus women a night, and it's spread across 4 different locations. We are full every night. There is a massive demand for our beds, particularly because it's women only, and that's one of the things that we constantly get women contacting us about to see, when can I get a place in your service? I need it. So we are seeing as well that there's a much, I suppose, positive outcomes for women when they have their own rooms, when they're in these environments. Sharing rooms is just another add-on layer of trauma that you have to manage somebody else's complex. And look, strong relationships do, you know, form in these services, but still someone should have a safe place to be able to come to, you know, feel safe, not have to fear about the next person that might be coming into their room. And I suppose in terms of women who are pregnant, what we are seeing is women who are coming in, they might not necessarily know until after they have their child where they will go next. So you will have, not only do you have to give birth, you're not sure where you'll go next. And there's always that fear then that you may lose access to your child. Like, that is absolutely terrifying for our women. And as well, in terms of creating space for motherhood in these services, we need to do more. We need to be able to create these spaces where women can be mothers, and what that looks like. Reunification is so important, and having a review of systems and processes to see what does that look like tangibly for women. What does reunification look like? What does access look like? How does a woman navigate homeless services and access to their child? It is quite a traumatic experience to have to engage in that process. The other piece, I think, as well, is what we're seeing is when we have women who have moved on and have been housed, they're still quite vulnerable within the community. And when we're looking at the types of houses that the women are being moved to, they're still quite open to exploitation. Like, these survival relationships don't end, and like they will cross the threshold with the woman. So we really need to be very mindful of that gender responsive assessment tools. What are we doing to create that safety piece within women? And unfortunately, we've seen it happen where women are housed, they're on the road to recovery, whatever that may look like to them, but they have to come back to us because their placement has broken down. But really what's happened is they're so vulnerable, the violent relationships have followed them and they're not safe. So it's a whole systems approach that we need to take.
Chair, I'm conscious that my time is. Sorry, what I want to say is just I have to leave at 2:15, but I want to ask a follow-up question, and I want to hear if there's other responses as well, just in terms of the relationship with TUSLA, because I think that is critical to the conversation here, and also then with the local authority housing officers, because obviously, you know, women are placed and then, you know, it breaks down. But I'm not sure I'm going to be here for some of those answers, but I just want to just throw in those questions.
We'll get them read into the record if
that's
that's
right.
all.
Yeah.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Graves.
Look, first of all, thanks to all of you for coming in, and I read your submission. I've met many of you already, and I'm delighted that we have a group that's specifically geared towards women and their needs, and I suppose the hurdles that everybody faces, because you're spot on. You know, women are added on as and by the way, you know, and some of the groups that we've had over the past couple of weeks, you can see that gap, you know. So we had a group of last week from Merchants Quay talking about prison services for men. And of course, there's nothing in the Dukas for women at all, you know. So there's definitely that gap. One thing to note is, though, the work here is separate from the work of the strategy, although we will feed into it as much as possible. But what we're doing is looking at the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly. And one of the things that struck me as I met groups of women in particular is not so much their access to service, but them limiting themselves because of fear. You know, fear of losing their children, you know, living in a generational cycle where they can't get out of it, you know, because their partners or even their parents are pushing them either into prostitution or whatever else to feed somebody else's habit, you know. And my big question is, how do we get around that? How do we give people assurances that, you know, the help is there, and if you go and look for support, then afterwards we will be there for you as well, you know, because the idea of people going in and getting supports for addiction and then they're left, oh, you're cured, you know what I mean? You go and find somewhere to live and off you go. It's the follow-up and it's the long-term, and as you say, it's the dual diagnosis. So it's the full package. I mean, if the strategy was different, I'd say, yeah, women's strategy is the perfect thing and that's what we need to do, you know. But it's how do we do that? And it tends to be women, particularly from very deprived backgrounds, although, you know, I don't want to pigeonhole everybody into that. But they're the people that don't access the services in the first instance, you know. And because it's fear, they're afraid of the life of their kids, you know. And TUSLA, like, is, you know, is a very bad word, you know. People kind of think, oh, that's it, my kids are going to. So have you any ideas, like all of you, you know, have you any ideas how we can do that? How do we approach women and encourage them and say, there are supports there for you, and follow-on supports after? So how do you encourage women to access the services that are there? And thanks, Nikki, as well. It's always great to hear somebody with lived or living experience, and well done.
If I can take this.
Yeah.
I think what we need to do across services and across departments is that we all need to become trauma-informed. Gary spoke very well about stigma, and, like, you know, we work with men and women, but definitely the women we work with face a lot more stigma and shame than some of their male counterparts, yes, and have more complexities. They will be met in some of our service with a trauma-informed approach, and the professional they will meet will be trauma-informed trained and be aware of their own biases. Mm-hmm. But not every service has trauma-informed as a practice, yeah, and not every profession they meet will be aware of their own biases. So that is something that is a barrier for those women accessing services, and it's something that if we were to put an investment And I think it was Anita said that if we were to upskill people and train people, but if we were to come together as a community, and one thing we're very, very good at in the Midwest is collaborating. All the services funded under the Midwestern Drug and Alcohol Forum collaborate, because we don't have enough in what we do. So we have to stretch what we have to meet what the next person has and collaborate and work as best we can together. So funding is one key thing. Everybody being trained in trauma-informed approach, everybody being aware of stigma and shame, and we need to be aware of our language. We need to be aware of stigma and shame, no more than the stigma and shame that surrounded people that would endure mental health issues for years. We've done an awful lot of work on that, but the same stigma and shame applies today for people that are homeless, people that are in addiction, and people that have to engage in survival activities to navigate their way through homelessness and addiction. Myself and Jenny were speaking this morning. I'm working in Novus over 18 years, and I think in those 18 years I only ever remember 2 mothers being reunified with their children. So there's something really, really wrong in a system if I can only recall 2 women that have had reunification. Equally, in 18 years I'm working in services, I have stood at the graveside of people that I have worked with for 13, 14, 15 years that grew up in poverty and deprivation and in houses where there was a lot of trauma and a lot of stuff going on with addiction parents and parents having mental health issues. These cycles are broken. They lived in homeless accommodation for 14, 15 years. They die in poverty and deprivation. You know, sometimes an agency has to intervene to organise their funerals. So it has to be a cross-departmental approach. We have to look at housing. We have to consider every aspect of housing, particularly when it comes to women. A homeless woman that will present today that might be pregnant to any one of our services will be put into accommodation for a single woman. Potentially that accommodation is low threshold, where their peers are engaged in all sorts of survival activities. That woman has to try and keep herself safe and navigate her pregnancy in that environment. And as Jenny rightly said, has no clue where I'll be going after I have my baby. And will my baby be coming with me, or will my baby have to go elsewhere? Sometimes, you know, for women, like, they experience, the biggest barrier is the fear. Like, if I tell somebody this is going on for me, someone's going to knock on the door and take the child off me. And while we're speaking about services, like, we really have to consider the women that are sitting in hotel rooms today, rearing their families in a hotel room. We have over 5,000 children that are homeless in this country, so there is mothers managing 5,000 children in hotel rooms or family hubs. We have a long history of institutional care in this country. We are seeing 2nd and 3rd generation of institutional care in our services now, and unless we address our housing issue as well, all we are doing is creating service users for the future, because they're going to be damaged from their experiences and the adversity and the trauma of living in a hotel room or living in a family hub. And that woman's health is really, really under pressure, and that woman's mental health is really, really under pressure. And as Gary said, most of those mothers are mothering under surveillance. Sometimes they're afraid to go across the road to the shop to get a carton of milk in case somebody says they left their child unattended. Whereas if you're living within the community, you can say to your neighbour next door, will you look after my small one there while I fly to the shop for bread? Yeah. And nobody's making a call about you. So there's lots of things that we have to navigate, but there is answers, and I think the first thing is reducing shame, reducing stigma, and no matter what service that woman accesses, that she is met with a consistent trauma-informed approach, and that everybody becomes aware of their own biases.
Okay. Will any of the witnesses, yes, please?
The key of success, if we can name it a success, is to create the services so they focus on the overall well-being of the women accessing the services. You can't just focus on addiction or one of the issues. We need to strive in each of our services to focus on building the trust and safety, and it came from all the speakers. It has to be primary focus, you know, that addressing addiction, childcare support, or engaging with the family, etc., will follow. But the safety, building trusting relationship in place in our services is the key of what I would describe success, because the women accessing the service we feel safe, build trusting relationship, and will start opening about other issues. That's the key.
Thank you, Shelby. And thank you, Deputy Graves. Deputy O'Morgan.
I'm certainly not going to propose that I have a whole pile of solutions in relation to not only addiction services, but those very specific in relation to women. I made sure that I came in at the end. Look, see, when we're talking about addiction services, and we've done it here many times before, given the name of the committee, at least once every session somebody says, "So we already know what to do, we just actually need to do it." And there's an element of repetition. Now, this is different in the sense that you're dealing with the very specific issues that relate to women, particularly when you're talking about the issue around domestic violence, whether you're talking about, I suppose, a power differential that can exist when you're dealing with predatory men, as you will find when you're in or around drug addiction, drug crime, and all the rest of it. And that absolute constant that is drug debt intimidation. And in fairness, whether we're talking about women in addiction or we're talking about women, in an awful lot of time, it's the mother, the grandmother, the auntie are the people that get the knock on the door and that end up paying the money from a credit union loan and whatever else also. And again, the other words we love using are multi-departmental, cross-departmental, all working holistic. But that's a necessity. Like, you're never going to be able to deal with this issue. You're never going to be able to deal with underlying issues of poverty if you never actually deal with the homelessness crisis and the added issues that provides. If you fall into a scenario where you need mental health services and you cannot get them, that's obviously going to be a problem, and that will not necessarily be delivered by whatever addiction services there. And again, this state loves setting up silos. Now, we've moved from, I suppose, a new term that we love is, no wrong door and, single point of access and whatever else, but we use the term rather than see the reality of it. And as much as drugs and drug addiction is across the board now and isn't confined to certain postcodes, and we need to ensure that we have a catch-all service for those that fall into it. It's a different kettle of fish for people who have grown up in poverty in areas of deprivation and intergenerational trauma, which has never been addressed. And I really like when people talk about prevention, but real prevention in that scenario is getting into families long beforehand, and it's providing long-term supports. And it is dealing with the fear that people have of TUSLA. I remember someone saying before, maybe they just, the TUSLA early intervention supports need to be separate from, TUSLA that unfortunately is needed at times for a nuclear action. But in some cases, because the state failed to carry out those early interventions. And I suppose, like, on some level, you've already stated what you do. We just need to do more of that. We need to have those resources. So I'd be happy enough if we didn't just have conversations in here and we actually had real conversations and politicians had real conversations about this. I think it's absolutely brilliant, Nicola, when you're dealing with somebody who has lived experience. But I have not seen this at any sort of policy creation level. I don't even think we ask the right questions about particularly what happens well, in this case, for women who find themselves in these circumstances. And, it needs analysis in relation to what do we need to have? Because we already know what the individual services that are needed, but we don't have them. We never address it, and we just talk in generalities, right? So if anyone can propose, I suppose the solution was said earlier, we need funding, and then we need real resourcing, and we need the proper policing enforcement of, even if we created the greatest national drug strategy, it's no good without resources and making sure that it actually hits the points it's meant to.
Anyone in particular directing the question?
Oh, no, I'm just leaving that open.
Just throwing her out there. He's just
first person is crazy enough to put their hand up,
Can I make a comment? Sorry.
Please, Susan.
I suppose, Deputy, I mean this with the highest respect, and I'm not suggesting that you were saying otherwise, but we're working very often with the symptoms of what has happened, but some of the causes, domestic violence is a men's issue.
100%.
It's not a women's, and I'm not suggesting that you were saying otherwise, but it's not up to women or female-specific services to only work with this. And that just came up for me because you said about not being the expert.
No,
Yeah.
100%, and yeah, I agree completely. Like, it's an utterly, like, the fact is, we're talking about a power differential that is created by men who are acting as predators.
Yes.
None of that is acceptable in any way, shape or form. It makes the issues that you have to deal with from a point of view of addiction a million times worse. And again, there has been societal failure to deal with that.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it comes with putting in those supports early, like you said, with TUSLA, because very often we're working with the adults who were the children in that home. So we're if those child protection issues were addressed or supported at that early stage, we wouldn't have that numbers that we have accessing services. And I suppose it's crossover between both your questions around that fear of TUSLA, and it's not an irrational fear. Unfortunately, it's a very real fear because of things that are happening in the country. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of say that it's a
Yeah, and could I throw it in relation, and I suppose it's a follow-up from Marie around the idea of what we need to look at from a point of view of TUSLA, because in a perfect world, we have all those early interventions, we avoid some of this, we even have decent reactive circumstances when people find themselves in addiction, and women find themselves in those even more difficult circumstances. But it's how we provide that absolute protection for the woman in relation to her recovery. We try and maintain the family unit, but then we also have to make sure that we absolutely protect the child. Now, we're dealing with people who are failed as children themselves in many cases. So if somebody wants to tackle that.
From my own experience is that they don't try and protect the family unit. That's the problem. The child is removed and then you're pushed to one side. And like I said, excuse me, 2 years and 4 months later, I'm still being treated like an addict. And that's where we're failing, because it doesn't, I understand where they have to intervene at the start, and I completely understand that. But it's kind of
checks,
there's no trying to keep the family together. I can see from my point of view and from people I've been in treatment with and what I've heard from other mothers as well.
Do you mind me asking, at this stage, because what way is the relationship? Is the child in foster care?
No, thankfully she had a great dad, and her dad has her. Yeah. But I was in treatment with girls who had 3 kids all in separate foster homes. It's not good enough. It really isn't.
And that can be difficult on those foster parents too, as well. And I suppose it's how you bridge that, and none of it's easy. But what you're saying is there isn't a proper attempt at the minute, or
There's no
resource.
support for, like you said, the family unit. Absolutely not.
I'll tell you another one. TUSLA actually said to us in the Children's Committee that they were, at the minute, they have a new mode, what do you call it? They have a new model in relation to triaging and dealing with issues, but they said straight out there, 300 social workers short and about 100 social care workers short. So how could they be fit for purpose if that's from, that's their own words?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like the services, it very much depends on what office you get, what worker you get, what area you're in. So
You're relying on outliers.
We're relying on that, but it's also, I suppose, what Deputy Graves said around how do we challenge that fear and get women to know that the help is there. The help has to be there first before we can tell people the help is there. So if you're a woman struggling with addiction in Offaly, what do you have other than to travel to Dublin? And how can you afford that? Or if you're in Dublin, do you then have to stay in Dublin? And how do you do that in a housing and homeless crisis? So there's so many barriers to women constantly. You solve one thing and then you come up against another barrier, and then you solve that thing and then you come up against another barrier. So,
Deputy, I'm sorry, Rory, we're 2.5 minutes over.
Sorry, I'm not very good at telling time,
It's okay, we'll come back and we'll give you some leeway on it. It's okay. I think my questions are up now. First, I want to acknowledge the presence of Councillor Gail Ralph in the gallery. You're very welcome. So, Susan, absolutely accepting that men's violence against women is insidious, and it's the responsibility of men to confront that. I think it's us equally when it comes to the patriarchal structural violence that's built into a system that compounds it. I suppose in terms of how we deconstruct that violent system equally. I was in a prison a couple of months ago with the Justice Committee, and it was women's prison, and the guards there told us that almost every woman in there had experienced domestic violence. In some instances, judges were actually given prison sentences so that the woman would be removed from the home, and it's extraordinary. And then we had the contributions last week from another service providers who told us that there was no women-specific rehabilitation program in Mountjoy. I mean, that's just extraordinary in terms of what compounds the woman's experience, being absolutely almost always men's violence in some capacity, and then structural violence built in that just compounds it. Where does this committee need to start in terms of our recommendations? Like, in terms of what's the most productive thing we can be doing? We had Sarah Benson in from Women's Aid in the Justice Committee the other day, and she talked about the civil legal aid capacity absolutely about to plummet, in the sense that most women can't even access civil legal aid based on firstly, the thresholds of income, but then also just the backlogs. In terms of this committee, I know you talked about having a separate national drug strategy for women. I don't know, do we need a separate report?
I certainly think that one thing that you need is to gender-proof all of your questions and your answers, so that you're constantly looking, because the bias that Julie talks about, we don't notice our positionality. We men are too privileged, and we just don't notice. So we have to keep checking back. And, you know, even when I'm saying change the way that we think about recovery and recovery capital, that's because we're generally coming at it from a very male perspective all the time. So we have to re-question. We have to get us thinking differently about things, and sometimes that is to ask strange questions of ourselves and wonder about things, just to see, are we picking it up, because that power differential is real. And the deputy said, we know what to do, we just need to do it. Actually, we know what to do, we just need to decide to do it, because the power structures aren't necessarily deciding to do things. And I think in relation to SAIL project, one of the things that we discovered when we started the Davina project was just the enormity of domestic violence in the lives of the women who come to us. Easily 80%, closer to 90% really, which is utterly outrageous. And in that situation, I was trying to see what was annoying me about the term "no wrong door." And it is that when we work with women who come and disclose to us that there's domestic violence, there is no door. Because the number of women we've had to send back to their abuser, because there's no refuge for them to go to. And if, as was suggested, that the training could happen for people in refuges who could do some of the work, the recovery work can start in the refuges, but our refuges are full, and also the staff who are there are maybe not as skilled to deal with addiction. We need to do that. Yeah.
Anybody else wish to come in on anything so far? Yeah,
just going back to what Gary said there, and just your question. There's been serious amounts of evidence, and somebody said earlier, we know there's practice and models, and there's models of excellence in the country that know how to work with women, who know how to evolve their needs, who know how to listen to women, and there was a thing there of gender proofing. Even sometimes ourselves, asking women, they hate the word vulnerable, high risk, and it's what they're actually referred to in every document. Vulnerable women, high risk women, what does that mean for a woman when they hear that? Nikki gave an absolute fantastic, suggestion the other day. Where is the information they do need? So there's policy documents and there's practice documents and there's strategy documents, but a woman out there in crisis ends up on the street. Where is that information? They might be lucky and meet an outreach worker who, again, is limited in their capacity to what they can offer. They might be able to offer food, shelter. They're also limited. Do they have the information required to know how to actually refer them somewhere else again the next morning? Unfortunately, I think with the strategy at the minute and what we do know, everybody in this room, the system has been designed to silo services, And as long as people are in competition and there's movements of funds from one service to another, what Gary is suggesting, where as a collective people come, because it is as a collective where there's any of this change, with this system, when they can move one funding stream to another funding stream, you will never have services that can work together. So I think that needs to be addressed from the top.
Thanks, Nita. Could I ask a question? I presume we already know the answer to it, just to have it read into the record. In terms of the fear of having children taken away, how preventative is that in terms of stopping women seeking treatment?
It's the number one. It's the number one. Just to say myself, Coal Mine and Sale collaborated on, and it's a research paper, and it's you can read it. It's published. It is not an irrational fear, and we need to say that very clearly. So even information, as Nikki said, what kind of information can addiction services give? We can't say your child won't be removed, because actually there's probably a high probability, depending on what service you enter, you will be reported, it will be put down as emotional abuse, and your child will be removed, you know. So we can't even give them assurances without a joint protocol between TUSLA and the addiction. There's one between the Gardaí and TUSLA, but there's no joint protocol between any super support services and TUSLA. So that's where we could start.
Presumably that would be you'd encourage the committee to make a strong recommendation in that regard.
Yes.
Okay.
I think with hidden harm, the 3 red flags are mental health, domestic violence and addiction. And you might as well just be talking about the women who come to our services, because they're all ticking those boxes, flagging those flags. And until we start approaching these families with thinking about how do we keep these families together within child protection, then the children are going to be brought into care. And TUSLA are under such stress. I don't blame them for bringing the children into care, but trying to pick up the pieces with families afterwards, because there's no vision for those families coming back together.
Is there best practice we can point to elsewhere in that regard? And if not, we should.
They've done a lot of work in Scotland between the social work departments and the addiction services, you know, so there is again models of practice there. If, again, like as Gary said, we cannot blame TUSLA here, they're under severe pressure. They will be held accountable by the public if something happens to a child, which unfortunately we've seen all year. And unfortunately what we've seen with our women in the services, they are now reaping the consequences of harm that happened to children throughout the year, because the pressure has squeezed downwards. The surveillance has got even tighter. And, you know, it's just done it's backtracked us a long time, which I just very briefly will go back to, which is where when we said significant investment in staff. For staff to be able to navigate these, they need to be quite skilled. They're navigating, straddling child protection, domestic violence, mental health, addiction, families, working with the domestic violence perpetrators in a way that won't increase the risk to the woman any further. With that, we need skilled staff. If you look around this room here, most of these services are in the voluntary and the community sector. There's nobody here in the statutory sector. They're on voluntary and community sector pay. The risk of them leaving is even higher, and our women are even again. The skills go with them. The skills go, and again, we're left with trying to train. So I think until even pay parity is addressed in these, we cannot maintain the skills that's needed for the women.
Deputy Graves, would you like to come back in?
Do you want to go for it? To go.
I know, ridiculous as it was in the sense that I had swapped earlier, you know, so no apologies. I have to speak in relation to flooding. Look, if I could, if I could follow on 2 things, right? Because obviously in the Children's Committee we've dealt a huge amount with those particular cases everyone's aware of, and one of the solutions that have been thrown out is that idea of a protocol with the Gardaí, and it's like what you always look for, multidisciplinary teams, and that everybody's facing the one way. I'm just asking, when you talk about a protocol to support services, what would that actually look like?
What it looks like at the moment, there actually is a joint protocol between the Gardaí and TUSLA. I think what they're actually talking about is probably enforcing it, because that's been actually in place for a number of years.
I'd say it was ensuring it was happening, because some of those cases obviously didn't cross the desks. They should have anyway. That's another.
I suppose the experience, and I can only speak on the experience of Coal Mine, it's a constant battle and fight for the women. Nothing has ever came easy. There is no protocol. What it is, there's very much a top-down approach of, use will, use are beneath us and use report into us. The only thing we've ever been, any kind of agreements or protocols has been about report. If we look at the child protection training, the training, if you could sum it up into 2 words, is record and report. That's what. So child protection training has that. So that's not protocols. That's not working together. That's not multidisciplinary working. And the values of the people working and providing the support services be given equal weight, as opposed to just being told how to work. Because...
So you're talking even beyond, because like, I didn't frame it well earlier, right? If you build in that idea of stigma and maybe the lack of trauma informed, and there's a lack of respect shown to those that are in service who require, but you're saying this isn't even happening to the staff that are working front line. Well, that's particularly bad.
The stigma, I was talking to Julie before we came in here, and where we see that stigma on a daily basis is when people say to us, aren't you very good working with them women? Yeah. There's the stigma. The stigma as if we're just doing something good. There's nothing of we're professionals and there's duty of care to the women. So it's exactly, the stigma also lies within the services who's working. And with them, unfortunately, for a very long time, we had to build a lot of relationship at Ashley House. There was a thing of we were hiding these women. There was a lack of respect given that we weren't transparent or open about the challenges of these women. Where I suppose where we had to work for many years to show that we were coming from a strengths-based approach. We actually absolutely will be explicit about what they're finding challenging, but we're also going to be very explicit of what they do very, very well, and actually due to supports and failures of up to now. We did a study back a number of years ago, and someone had said it there, 4 out of 5 came from childhood households where maltreatment, either physical or sexual maltreatment, was present. A lot were third generation addiction. It wasn't second, it was third generation. Poverty had followed them right throughout, and everything what people talked about here. So when we represent our women in a case conference, we need to be, and the services need to be, a lot of us do come from a strengths-based trauma-informed approach, and unfortunately when we're working with different approaches, there's a lost in translation that's happening. Who gets the consequences? Our women. And unless our staff are skilled enough to be able to hold and be able to support correctly, they won't, and the women do. And, we talked about earlier, we are re-traumatised and traumatised people already. Like, traumatised, added trauma, removal of children. And what people keep seeming to forget is women can have more children. So removal is not the answer. Many of our women would say, why do you have so many children? Well, when you lose something, you want to replace it. So actually, that's why they're having so many children.
And you're in a bad place. You're probably not making great decisions
missing out of policy that you just be the answer, first call of removal of children. You have not in any way addressed the problem, because actually there's a high chance that woman's having another baby next year. And does it just continue? And Julie said it there, they are our future. There are now service users. We see them coming back in the door. If we had a very adequate care system, because what we do have to say, some children there's never issues. We did a study and there was never issues. Out of every 44 women that had children removed from women from the sale and coal mine services, not one of them disputed why their children were removed, which was amazing. They had full understanding and actually agreed. However, where the frustration was they couldn't get them reunified, and this was as there was no clear, so there's a legal framework for removal of children, there is no legal framework for why a child should be reunified. And that's what's missing out of.
Very helpful.
So that's a route map. Can just make the tiniest of comments, and because we had Archways in again in front of the Children's Committee, and doing everything from early interventions right through to Greentown and dealing with kids that have fallen into criminality. And one of the guys just got up and said, "Well, look, let's be clear. There's an element of failure on our part, not to take away from the work that's been done. We're dealing with 3 or 4 generations in, and we are still dealing with the issues because we have not adequately resourced those services that know what to do it. And as you said, Anita, we're not even giving people the respect they need. And we're failing everyone, and we're particularly, as we can see here, failing women and women in addiction." All right,
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Graves?
Yeah, well, just a couple of comments, I suppose, on the removal of children first. I mean, this idea that every woman that is in addiction is a bad mother is just appalling. And I do understand there are situations where children's, are best served by removal for whatever period of time, but not forever, And I'm kind of a bit gobsmacked that you're 2.5 years, and still no kind of back to normal. I just find that tragic, to be honest with you. Secondly, I think the idea of a section on women in our report is a really good idea. I think it should be separated because there are different needs. And then finally, just to say, so I have a constituency office where I live, and the number of women in violent situations attending is just quadrupled, I'd say, over the last... Certainly it started with COVID, but since then it's gotten worse and worse and worse. And what really gets to me is, so you have a woman in a violent situation, she has to flee her home. And her abuser is left sitting high and mighty while she's running off into the dark with her kids or whatever, to live who knows where, because we don't have enough refuges, we don't have enough supports and places for them. If justice was being done, there should be zero tolerance, and she should be the one in the home with the kids on, the abuser wherever. I think the system there is broken. And I know where I live there isn't access to refuges, there just isn't any, And you have women then, kind of, some of them, if they're single, they don't have kids, living in hostels, and if they're in addiction or even recovery, they're finished because they're surrounded by other people that are in the same situation, similar situation, worse situations, So there's kind of no escape. So I think the whole thing needs to be looked at, and kind of some joint up thinking being done about ongoing services.
The key part of that, just to pick up on one of the points there, if you're lucky enough as a worker to get a woman a space in a refuge, right?
Yeah.
And you get her to safety, sometimes that's very far out of her own community.
Absolutely.
I sat into a car in Limerick at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening to drive a woman to a refuge in Kilkenny to get her safety. But Kilkenny is not her centre of interest.
Yeah.
So they can only hold on to her for a certain period of time. Then she has to come back to Limerick because that's her centre of interest, and she's literally back in the lion's den because she was gone from that particular partner. But every time that partner or member of the family would meet her somewhere, she was intimidated to say it wasn't safe for her to be in Limerick, but she couldn't access homeless services anyplace else because of the centre of interest issue. So when we stopped allowing homeless people to be transient, when they had to go to their centre of interest, we created more complexities and we created more barriers, particularly for women. And rightly so. Why should the perpetrator of violence be sitting at home in the height of luxury while a woman and her children are seeking refuge, sofa surfing in overcrowded accommodation with a family member because it's not safe for them to be at home? These are things that we have to consider, and we have to consider the threshold of domestic violence shelters as well. And until across every department and every organisation, community, statutory, voluntary, start looking at addiction as the symptom of other stuff that's going on, and start taking it. The strategy speaks very highly to a health-led approach, and so does the Citizens' Assembly. We need to look at addiction as a medical issue and treat it like a medical issue. Take away the stigma, the shame, the judiciary, the forensic stuff out of it, where people are in it, going between prison and homeless service. If we take a medical approach, no matter what department you're meeting, you will have much better outcomes and much better understanding.
Can I just come in on one particular piece as well? In terms of, we're seeing a very worrying trend in a very small rural town of women who are being forced to rough sleep with their violent partners. So what we're seeing is these women are being excluded from services because of their partner won't let them to access them. But we don't have enough couple services to be able to offer services to the women, particularly residential services, to the couple. So that's a point of entry of safety for the woman. Like, if we had those services, at least there is a protective layer that they have somewhere safe to sleep and to, I suppose, work on their expressed goals. But without that, there are a number of women around Ireland in this moment of time who are being forced to rough sleep, and there is no services available to them. So we need to look at that in light of the violence that's occurring, being perpetrated against women, is looking at couple services.
Gary, please.
Just a couple of things in responses to what people have been saying, but just again, we worked with a woman who went to a refuge, and it was great that the refuge took her, but it was in Bray, and she was having to come back to the north inner city on a daily basis to get her methadone, to go to the same clinic that her violent partner was in. And again, part of the reason why she wasn't easily moved was because women who use drugs are not believed. And so she was lying then, so that it wasn't easy to move her. So just to remember that. But what's striking me as we're talking is, unsurprisingly, we're talking about women who use drugs, and we talk about her as a mother, in relationship to partners, in her responsibility for her kids, and we're almost forgetting to talk about her. And that's not surprising, because that's what happens, because women who use drugs are relational in way we men don't even understand. And I think it's really important to pause and to come back to her needs. And to keep that there as well, and that as part of the report there's the women's needs, and then her role as a mother and the needs that go with that is another part of that as well.
I think we see that, but I think where women make decisions is because they have to,
absolutely,
because their situations.
So our attendance has been somewhat hamstrung by the Shannon votes that are going on at the moment. If anyone feels like there's anything you wish to add on to, or anything you haven't had the opportunity to say, anything you need to make sure that we understand, please feel free to take the moment now if you like, but there's absolutely no obligation either to do so.
I just want to say the one thing is to bring to the forefront the voices of the lived experience and the living. Like today, when we walk out of this room today, like potentially the thing that we'll remember is Nikki's statement. And it's so important that the lived-in voice is central to anything that we do. And without it, we're not going to be able to achieve what we need to do, which is support women for where they're at. So that's central to all of the work that we do. The lived experience, the lived voice must be central.
Thank you.
We have to pay tribute to the women that we've worked with over the years, because we are the workers we are today because they allowed us to share in their lived or living experience. They trusted us and shared their journey and their stories with us. They highlighted gaps in services to us. Like we opened a drop-in centre in Limerick this year in April, and it's called Annie's. It's for any woman of any need, of any threshold or any requirement. But equally, it gives credit to the first woman that Nova's ever worked with or provided palliative care. So she trusted us with her journey and her story all those years. And now she has paved the way for other women to come after her. So, like, when we speak about the women, we have to speak about their strengths, we have to speak about their resilience, and we have to speak about the fact that we are the workers we are today. They have trained us far better than any academic setting that you could ever sit in. So we have to give credit to that as well.
I suppose just to say that we're lucky enough, I suppose, in some of the services to have, like Anita said, 18 hubs within Coolmine, and that those women are lucky that some of our services happen to be in those areas. Just to not have that lost today, that it's, if you're lucky enough to be within a certain area, to have certain services available to you. And I suppose we wanted to be able to see that, I suppose, that continuum of care across the country, in every region, in every county, that women can access at any point, and any of the 4 tiers of services, that they're not just lucky to have met a good worker in a good service in a good part of their country.
Okay. Nobody else wishes to say anything? I just want to thank... Yeah, Gary, go.
Can I just say 2 things that have been game changers for us? We have a community social worker on our team, so social workers can talk to social workers better than ordinary human beings, and that has been really, really helpful in supporting women who are having to go and face the social workers alone. And the second one I mentioned before is the drug abuse coordinators in the Guards, the domestic abuse coordinators in the Guards, the DACs, who do amazing work in just helping women who maybe don't have a door to go to be safe, and just to encourage that service would be supported, and you might look at it more closely.
Thank you, Gary.
And just
Nikki?
going forward, that women shouldn't have to choose between recovery or their kids. There should be something that covers both, so.
And it's not just kids, it's the carer roles that women hold in Irish society. So you're still expected to drop the kids off to school, go look after your mum, do a hospital visit, do the shopping, do the cooking, look after your recovery, go collect the kids from school, doing all of that, whether it's from a home or a family hub or a hotel room. We still expect women to do all of these roles. And what happens to all of the people they're looking after if they put their recovery first and go in somewhere? Who looks after them? So there's so many balls that women are juggling, so they will always put themselves last.
And thank you to all our witnesses, Nikki. Thank you so much for bringing your lived experience. It's invaluable to us all. I'm learning a huge amount from every single session we're doing at this. There's a screen in front of me that says the Oireachtas Committee on Drug Use, but I think today I got the language that there's very little about this committee that's actually about drug use. It's actually about the manifestations of trauma, structural violence, state failures, and how people left behind are somehow trying to catch up, and we're not supporting them in any way, so thank you. Meeting adjourned. Next meeting is the 26th of February at 12:30, and the meeting is now adjourned. Cameras are-